Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. I'm Andrew Harris. I'm Director of Campaigns and Alumni Relations at the university, and I'd like to welcome you to our latest session of Bright Minds. So our first in 2023, brought to you from a very cold, a very wintry, a very snow-laden Sheffield today. So this webinar series has been created for our alumni and friends to showcase the varied, the exciting, the impactful research that is taking place by our PhD students at Sheffield. So it genuinely is wonderful to see so many alumni joining us today from all over the world and from such a wide range of backgrounds. We had about alumni from about 71 countries sign up to this particular event. So the topic for today is music and how it can be used in various ways to help us to overcome everyday issues. Today's speakers will focus specifically on how music making can be applied to aid decision making, and secondly, how music can be used therapeutically to improve sleep. So I hope you're looking forward to hearing from our PhD students, Billy, and also Rory, and Professor Renee Timmers, Head of the Department of Music at the university. I'm sure Renee will tell us more when she opens shortly, but we're exceptionally proud of our Department for Music and also of our music making in Sheffield. So we have the distinction of being a Steinway school. So we're first in the Russell Group of universities for the quality of our teaching and sixth overall for our research environment. And music is a very broad area of study at Sheffield, all the way through from composition through to musical technology. So today we'll begin with a short talk from Professor Timmers, followed by the two presentations. And after the talks, there'll be an opportunity for some questions and answers. We expect this event to last for about an hour, and we have some questions that have been pre-submitted by alumni in advance, so we will address those as well. So forgive me for some housekeeping, but to allow participants to have the best viewing experience, we have automatically turned off your microphones and also your cameras. If you would like to submit a question, please do use the chat function. So that's the chat function at the bottom of the screen. We will also look at the Q&A function, but if you can use the chat function, that would be preferred. And as time allows, we'll address as many questions as, you bring forward to today's session. We will be recording this webinar, and this will be available on the Bright Minds webpage next week, as well as on the University of Sheffield player, which I'll mention a little more at the end. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Professor Timmers. Professor Timmers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. Really nice to be here and to be shortly explaining a bit about the music department, but especially psychology of music, which this seminar is about. So I'll do the technicalities first. Yes, there we are. So I put in a snowy picture from a view that I have from my house. As you know, Sheffield has these lovely hills, and indeed it can be totally beautiful, if not a bit unpractical as well when it snows like today. But this seminar is on the power of music as a general topic, and which relates to psychology of music as a research and teaching area. So it's very exciting to be in Sheffield for me. I'm not from the UK, I was from the Netherlands, so a very flat country, and now I'm living in the hills, which is one of the appeals. But having this psychology of music area to be part of, community to be part of, is really very exciting. And Sheffield has the longest established MA in psychology of music. So, but you can also study it as an undergraduate student. So it's taught to music students. We have then also the MA courses, which are studied either through distance learning or on site. And then indeed quite a cohort of postgraduate research students, or PhD students, who do research in this area. It is a relatively new area, so it started in the 1980s. But now it is really quite growing quickly. There's lots more attention on it in media. So I didn't know about this at all when I was at high school, or even when I was studying for my undergraduate degree. But then now this is becoming more established and people know about it. And indeed, kind of findings from these research areas are also trickling over into applications. So as a research area, it investigates cognition and perception of music. So what kind of cognitive processes, but also neurological processes, allow us to perceive music and make music. And Billy's presentation will be most closely related to that kind of broad area. The other big topic in this area is processes underlying emotional responses to music. So why do we respond emotionally to music? Why do we perceive as if music has emotions or portrays emotions? What is the basis of that? And then indeed applications of that kind of knowledge in everyday life. And Rory's presentation relates to that. So as you see, I put some pictures here that show the kind of projects and the breadth of things that are going on. We have a big project on music technology and dementia, also a new network starting on singing in balance, and the 2 research centers on music mind machine. So it's quite an interdisciplinary research area combining music, psychology, and computer science. And indeed, Billy is actually placed in the psychology department, whilst Rory is in the music department, and they both collaborate with others. So either music and psychology or music and computer science, or 3 of them. The other research center is Spark, which is Sheffield's Performer and Audience Research Center. So that is a bit more about music in everyday life. So going to concerts, why do we do that? And also the experiences of performers and audiences. Okay, I think that's enough as an introduction. Let's go to these 2 presentations. First of all, the presentation by Billy Aryanto.
Okay, thank you very much, Renee, for the introduction. So I will say hello first to everyone. Thank you for coming to this webinar, and thank you for University of Sheffield for giving me the opportunity to present my study here. So as Renee has introduced me, my name is Billy Aryanto. You can call me Billy. So I also did my master in psychology of music back in 2015, but I have a background in psychology. So now I can say like now I'm back to my root as a psychologist. Now I'm taking the PhD in psychology, but still like my heart is still like in music. So that's why like I'm still doing the research about music and cognitive psychology in particular. And let me share my screen about today's presentation. Yes, so as Renee has mentioned, like my research is about exploring the relationship between active music making and executive functions. And I was supervised by Claudia von Bastian and Emma Blakey from the psychology department, and also Renee in the music department. As you know, that like this research is like very multidisciplinary, so that's why it's a good opportunity for me to share to you that like music can also affect like our cognition, but how it can be affected, and like how it's like the relationship between this music and executive functions, or maybe what is actually executive functions. So I will explain it in my presentation. So first, I want to ask me before everyone's attending this webinar, are you a musicians? Are you maybe like playing in a band, or like me, like I play the flute in an orchestra, or maybe you're a bathroom singer? So I have a good news for you. There is a vast of research saying that musicians have better cognitive abilities than like non-musicians. For non-musicians, it doesn't mean that you have a bad cognitive abilities, but the musicians have say that like they have better cognitive abilities, such as like the intelligence or processing speed, something like that. And my questions here is actually like how can like musicians have like better cognitive abilities? So then like non-musicians, what makes the difference between like people who play music and people who don't play music? And in particular now, like I'm doing a research really focused on like one variable, which is the executive functions. So that's going to be the focus of my talk today. So my research is about active music making and executive functions. What is actually the definition? How strong is the relationship? How can they be related? And why is it important to understand the relationship between these two variables? So that's what I'm going to present today. So active music making, the definition is person's lifetime engagement with musical activity. So the engagement with the music is when you play the music, when you're singing, when you're composing, basically like any activity that is related to in your daily life, when you're using the music actively, like when you're playing music instruments, playing piano, or like singing, that's active music making. And I'm trying to find the relationship of this with the other variables, which is the executive functions. So executive functions, it's a set of mental skills that help us control and regulate our thoughts, actions, and emotion in order to achieve our goals. So basically, in short, like basically executive functions is your way to plan and to make decision. For examples like this, people with good executive functions, maybe not good executive functions. So with the executive functions, when you wake up in the morning and then like you think, oh, this morning I need to go to the campus, for example. And before I go to the campus, I need to prepare this. I need to have breakfast. I need to take a shower, for example. So when you're making like a plan in your head, it means that like you're using your executive functions. And because it's a set of mental skills, there is like several skills that you need when you want to use your executive functions. What are the skills? So there, according to Friedman and Miyake that I put the citation previously, executive functions has got 3 factors here. So the first one, the factors is inhibition. Inhibition is when you have the ability to resist the distraction and suppress unwanted thoughts or actions. For example, when you're doing some tasks and then you need to focus on that, so you're using the inhibition to suppress like all of like the distraction when you're working at the office, and then oh, there is like someone's talking or something, so you try to suppress the distractions. That's how you use your inhibition when you're doing something. For the next one is the shifting. Shifting is the ability to switch flexibly from one task to the other task and adapt to its changing situation. So for example, when you're working on your, for example, you're opening your Excel and then like, oh, I need to send an email, and then you have to switch from working in the Excel to sending the email. That's when you shift from one task to the other task, and then you shift again to the other thing, That's when you need shifting. The last one is working memory updating. It is the ability to monitor and quickly update information in your brain. So when you're doing something, you always need to update the information in your brain. Like, oh, I need to finish this one, and then after you finish, you update to the you go through like to the next task, and all of the information when you're making, for example, like when you're working and you're making mistakes in the middle, like, oh yeah, I need to fix this. That's when you need the working memory updating. And my question is based on like my study is how strong is actually the relationship between when you're playing the music or when you're using music in your daily life, when you're a musician, how strong is the relationship with the executive functions. So I'm doing a systematic review and meta-analysis. So basically systematic review and meta-analysis, for those of you who are not familiar with this, is I try to search from previous literatures and then to search the effect size of the past studies to see like whether like there is a strong relationship between these 2 variables. So I'm trying to find from 4 databases and doing a citation chasing, and then I found this screen the reports, and then I found 33 between group design studies. So it means that like when the studies is comparing between musicians and non-musicians, and also 14 correlational studies when they're trying to find the relationship between music ability, playing music in daily life with the executive functions. And I found like 124 effect size from the between group design studies, and then 111 effect size from the correlational studies. And here's the result. So I found like a weak relationship between inhibition, shifting, and the active music making, but I found like a moderately related for the working memory updating. So what does it supposed to mean? So it means that when you're using music, when you're a musician, when you have like a good music ability, we know based on my study, we found that like people who play music may have like a ability to update their memory better. So it's quite moderately related for like this two, between playing the music, music ability, and the working memory updating. Although the inhibition and shifting have like a weak relationship, but it's still there. It's still significant, although like it's not as strong as like the working memory updating. So basically in my study, I found that like there is a relationship with these three factors, but the strongest one is the working memory updating. So maybe like musicians have like a better ability to update their memory when they're doing something. Yeah. And how can they be related? This is one of the question. We know there is a relationship, but how can they be related? So one of the underlying mechanism is called cognitive transfer. So cognitive transfer is a transfer of skill from one domain to the other domain. And there are two types of transfer. First one is near transfer. So it's when you're doing something, when you're practicing one skill, and then like it transfers to the similar skills. For example, when you're playing volleyball, for example, when you're playing a volleyball indoor, so it's most likely that you can also play the volleyball outdoor because they're the same skills playing the volleyball. And for the next one is the far transfer, is when you're doing one activity or you improve one skill, but it increases like the other skills that is unrelated with the skill that you're doing in the beginning. So in this case, like what my research found is that is a far transfer between playing the music and the executive functions, because like we thought that like there is no relationship between this playing the music and your brain or like your cognitive abilities, but apparently there is a relationship between these two variables. Yeah, so also like I want to give like a little disclaimer about like my study. So my study is a relationship studies. So I found that like if when you're playing the music, when your score of when you're playing the music increase, or like when your music ability increase, the score of the executive functions is also increased. But we don't know the causality yet, whether like the music will affect the executive functions or it's the other way around. So we still need further research to try to find whether when you're playing the music, will it increase your executive functions ability, or when you have like a good executive functions, then you may be like you may become like a better musicians. Yeah, so my study here, we found the relationship. Yes, we know that like one score increase, the other score increase, but we don't know yet whether like the music affect the executive functions or it's the other way around. The executive functions affects the way you play the music or your music ability. So take-home message in conclusion, based on my study and my presentation, active music making is related to all three executive functions with the largest average association for working memory. And one possibility to explain the relationship is the far transfer between active music making and executive functions. However, it is yet unclear whether active music making has a direct relationship and what is the causality between them. So maybe like the relationship between these is mediated by the other variables, or there is like other variables that makes a relationship between this playing the music or using music in your daily life and your ability to make plan or to make decision, and the way you update your memory to shift from one information or to inhibit unrelated tasks. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much. And these are my great supervisors. So there's Renee, Emma, and also Claudia. And if you want to know about the pre-registration of my study, you can also open the link below there. Yes. And yes, so now like I also going to introduce the next speaker. So The next one is my friend Rory here. Rory is in the music department, and Rory is going to present the power of music to help you sleep. And as a disclaimer, sleep is also can be beneficial for your cognitive abilities. So we kind of like have like a relation between my study and also Rory's studies. And over to you now, Rory.
Thanks, Billy. Hi, everybody. So my name is Rory. I'm another one of Renee's students. I'm in my 3rd/4th year of my PhD. And my project is on the use of music to help with sleep. So my background is actually in music. I studied music as my first degree and then spent about 6 or 7 years teaching for a music service down in Sussex. In 2017, I decided to go back to studying and came here to Sheffield to do the master's in psychology of music. And that took me on this completely crazy adventure to now being here doing a PhD and talking to you. So I will just get my screen up and ready. And away we go. Yeah, so I'll be talking about my project, which is on the use of music to help with sleep. We're actually working so my project is part of a collaboration with a company here in Sheffield who are developing a sleep aid device that uses light and sound to help a person relax and wind down at night to fall asleep. The device includes a handheld component that measures a person's biosignals, their heart rate, skin temperature, and skin conductance, and uses that to work out where someone's at in their sleep onset and in turn inform the stimulus to help them wind down and fall asleep. So in working on the musical side of the device, we want to better understand what kinds of music can help people get to sleep, and then how can we use that in such an application using a person's physiology to generate or manipulate music that can help people wind down and fall asleep. To give a bit of extra background, first of all, I'm sure I don't need to tell most of you how important sleep is for our physical and mental health. Sleep affects everything from our immune system to how our brains work, our executive functions, all kinds of things, to an extent that disrupted sleep has been linked with an increased risk for various degenerative issues, from heart disease to diabetes and dementia. Most reports suggest some 5 to 15% of people suffer from insomnia disorder, but 30 to 40% of people report at least one nighttime insomnia symptom. So sleep problems are really quite prevalent. And while there are lots of remedies out there, medications and such, they're not always ideal. Some things have side effects, and some drugs you can take to help you sleep don't actually promote natural sleep. They do other things to help you fall asleep, but it's not quite the same as real healthy sleep. Understanding and promoting alternative methods and different ways we can help ourselves sleep is really important. And one of those alternative music methods is music, which is something that seems to already be quite popular for people. So surveys suggest that a lot of people already use, or they believe that music is helpful in helping with their sleep. And actually, there's been a lot of research interest in the topic that has generally given support for music's efficacy as a sleep aid. But there are still a few open questions on the topic. Firstly, we want to better understand how music actually helps with sleep. So what are mechanisms by which music can influence our sleep? What kind of music is best at helping people get to sleep? And what are the factors that can influence how an individual might be affected by music and sleep? So everybody is really different. Everyone has their own preferences or requirements when it comes to their sleep behaviors, let alone music. And so that kind of leads into the next question, which is, how can we really use music as a sleep aid? What are the kind of generalizations we can make for people, and how can we optimize it for individuals when individuals can be so different? So firstly, how can music help with sleep? So 3 mechanisms have been put forward as suggestions for how music might help with our sleep. The first is by reducing arousal. So in psychology, we talk about affect arousal, which is a state of activation or being activated, either psychologically or physiologically. And this is seen as a key component in how we respond to emotional stimuli. So music is something that can mentally or physically stimulate us, either by increasing arousal, for example, make us want to move or dance, or decreasing arousal, so helping us to relax and wind down and fall asleep. So obviously this has implications. This is relevant for sleep. In fact, sleep problems are sometimes referred to as a disorder of hyperarousal, which is defined as a heightened physiologic, affective, or cognitive state, i.e. our body or bodies or minds are just too active and we can't switch off at night and get to sleep. So music may help to counter that in some ways. Likewise, music can have a huge influence on our emotions. So by positively influencing our moods and our emotions, that also plays into promoting relaxation and sleep. And finally, there's this notion that music just can simply provide a means of distraction, something to help take our minds off of the stress of the day just gone. So what music can help with sleep? So there are a lot of studies on this topic, and researchers carrying out studies on music and sleep typically choose music that's in very similar properties. So slow in tempos, little rhythmic or dynamic variation. Other studies have found a prominence for major modes, so a bit happier sounding, and also music with a kind of lower vein frequency register, kind of duller rather than brighter sounding. However, when we look at surveys that have asked people who say they use music to help with sleep, what things they use, they say all kinds of things, from classical to pop music to even heavy metal. One study found that most songs reported contained lyrics, which contrasts a bit with our notion of what might be soothing or sedative is typically instrumental. And another study of Spotify playlists found a great deal of variety between different playlists described as intended for sleep, either according to their descriptions or their titles. And they found identified different clusters using features extracted from the Spotify data catalog. And although of their 225,000 songs they analyzed, more than half of them were ambient pieces of music, but still some 60,000 were what they called radio tracks or pop songs. In fact, the most popular track in the sleep playlists, i.e. the one that occurred in the most playlists, was a song called Dynamite by the Korean pop group BTS, which, if you're not familiar with, is an upbeat, syncopated, very rhythmic pop song, quite different from the ambient music in a lot of the other playlists. So there's clearly some discrepancies here. So we did a bit of digging into Spotify playlists ourselves, specifically trying to see if sleep music was different from music and relaxing playlists. And while we found that they were quite similar in a lot of ways, both were typically acoustic, instrumental. Sleep music was a bit slower, had a bit less energy, a bit quieter. But using some machine learning models, we found that we could actually, the models could predict whether the music fell into sleep playlists rather than relaxing playlists with a reasonable degree of accuracy. So there's still something distinguishing, but there's still a lot of variability in there. But the important thing is what listeners think. So how to this variability I mentioned between surveys and studies. So we wanted to try and address this by carrying out a listening survey where we presented participants with samples of music taken from those Spotify playlists, along with some commercial sleep music, so music that was marketed as being for sleep or for meditative purposes, and some including music that had been used in previous studies. And we also had some music contributed by composers in our department. So we put all these to participants and we asked them to respond to ratings that corresponded to themes around arousal, so energy, activation, as I mentioned earlier, valence, if it's negative or positive, and also ideas around distraction, absorption, engagement, and comfort and such like. And then simply whether they thought that that piece could help with sleep or would prevent sleep. And so we saw a lot of correlations between the different ratings, but using some statistical modeling techniques, we found that how sleep-inducing a piece was rated as opposed to sleep-preventing was best predicted by ratings that corresponded to arousal factors, but also comforting, the idea of freeing the mind, and just if they liked it or not. Musically, we did some music analysis as well, and features like brightness and event density, basically how busy the music is, could also predict whether a piece was rated as sleep-inducing or not. But when we tried to combine these different factors, these subjective ratings seem to overshadow the musical features a lot more in predicting whether an individual found the music to be sleep-inducing. Which is not to say that there weren't any patterns, which there were. To illustrate this, I've brought these are a couple of examples of some of the tracks that were in the study. These were the most sleep-inducing sleep-inducing tracks according to the average ratings. So the first, second, and sixth, as it happens. The first is actually one of the pieces submitted by one of the composers in our department, and it sounds like this. I hope the audio works. The next piece is from Max Richter's From Sleep. So this is a series of works that were composed with sleep in mind. And this third piece, I'm sure a lot of you will recognize. This is a piece that's actually been used in a lot of music psychology research as an example of very relaxing music. And this was a piece that came out of our selection from the Spotify playlist as a bit of a coincidence, but not too much of a surprise. This is Satie's first gymnopody. So yeah, I hope you're all reasonably soothed by that. And a lot of the other most sleep-inducing tracks were similarly very minimal. They were quite light sounding, and a lot of them were piano-based, which again falls back into kind of the general idea that we might have about what could be seen as soothing. But what the ratings tell us is that the individual variability in people's essentially preferences, there's so much individual variability in people's preferences that we can't just make assumptions based on the music on its own. To kind of illustrate that more specifically, so the second piece I played was the only piece that didn't receive any negative sleep induction ratings. So these were on bipolar scales. So they rated it to the one end if it was sleep inducing, and the other if it was sleep preventing. And every piece had some outliers across the scale. This Max Richter this piece was the only one that didn't have any negative, but it still had people who didn't really think much either way. So although these were on average rated as sleep inducing, there was still people who had who thought they weren't, to quite an extreme in some case. I think another interesting angle that sheds a bit of light on this is familiarity. So not only did we ask people to give this as a rating, but we also allowed participants to leave comments on every piece that they heard. And the Satie piece attracted a lot of responses. It was very familiar. A lot of people knew it, and they said things like this. One person said, when quarantine started, we did the study back in 2021. When quarantine started, I barely slept due to stress and anxiety, and I used this piece to fall asleep for a month straight. It's more than comforting. The song just feels like home. So great. Not only they said they've used this to help with sleep, but they've picked up on this theme of comfort that we asked about. Another person described the piece as very melancholic and comforting. It's like a cuddle for your soul. But other people had completely different responses. One said, I love Satie, so this would keep me awake as I try to remember the fingering. Assuming this person is probably a pianist, so maybe being a musician might say something about how a person might engage with music differently. And another person echoed that. It only doesn't free my mind completely because I recognize the tune. And as a musician, I was predicting what came next while listening. So you can see how this really isn't very straightforward. We have this back and forth between this subjective and the musical factors, and even with some of these subjective factors like familiarity, it can have a totally opposing implications depending on different listeners. So to kind of summarize that so far, there are some clear general commonalities that ideas about the kind of music that could help people with sleep, but the subjective appraisals tell us more about what might work for an individual. Not surprisingly, this is not a one-size-fits-all situation. And so the challenge for applying this in any kind of therapy or application is to better understand where the common ground is and the specifics about the individual variability. So we can say a little bit from our results that the sense of comfort is clearly important, and dissociation created by the music, and not surprisingly, they have to enjoy the music as well. But so the challenge is understanding what makes a piece of music tick all the right boxes for any individual. And I'll just say a little bit very briefly about what we're planning to do next. So the last phase of project is to carry out a nighttime study to actually ask participants to listen to music as they fall asleep and see if it makes a real difference. So there's been this type of study has been done before, but we're continuing with this theme of investigating differences between individual preferences and our musical expectations. So exploring if there really is a significant difference when it comes to actually helping people get to sleep at night, rather than simply asking people to just rate if they think this is going to help or not. Yeah, so the idea being still seeing if we can still make some generalizations or general foundations for selecting music for help with studies. We also want to look at the physiological changes during sleep onset, going back to the device being developed with our collaborators. We'll specifically be looking at an individual's sleep onset, so how long it takes them to get to sleep. And one way we can measure this is by looking at changes in a person's skin temperature. So your temperature changes in the evening have a very particular pattern that makes it a really reliable way of seeing where a person is at in their sleep onset. So by measuring this, we can see if the music is helping people who have trouble getting to sleep, and if there's a difference in what kind of music they're listening to. And we have some wearable devices, and we'll be getting some other sensors that mean we can let participants do this in the comforts of their own home as well. So I'll leave it there, and just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening. That QR code will take you to my profile in our website. I'll leave that for a second, and I look forward to taking any questions.
Thank you so much, Billy and Rory. That was really interesting. We have lots of interesting questions as well to discuss. So yeah, let's get cracking with that. I mean, I think the discussion is always very enlightening, as well as the presentations themselves. So we first will do some of the pre-submitted questions, and then we will look at the incoming ones that have been coming in and might come up as well. Not sure if, I mean, there were some questions about also getting involved, so you can always follow up or by email, I think, if your question isn't addressed. So for example, well, I think all three of us can be found on the web, with including an email address. So the first question, Billy, yeah, this came from a music teacher. So, and I'll just read you the whole question, and there are some sub questions. So I'm interested to know if you think the active music making that my beginner pupils do is likely to have a positive effect on their executive function, but also whether that relates to how much time they spend on music making, or on their ability, so how advanced a level they play at, or even their age.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, Renee, for the question. So for that, actually, like for my own study, it's focused on the healthy adults. So basically, people above 18 years old. Based on my study, what I found is that like most likely is the music ability actually that has like a relationship with that. And also because I also have people who compare between musicians and non-musicians, and musicians is usually defined as people who play music more than 10 years. So I think like the longer you play the music, like it will have like an impact on like the executive functions. But actually there is a lot of like research on like music on children, especially like age between like 6 till 11 years old, if I'm not mistaken. And they're looking at like how the music training will affect the executive functions or like the cognitive abilities in general. And there is like a good evidence that there is like the music training can impact the cognitive abilities in general. But I cannot say for sure, like, is it the executive functions, but I'm sure that like one of them is the intelligence, the cognitive abilities in general. But for the executive functions, I think like it needs further research, especially for the children. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So what are the other question also for you? So what are the implications for music makers are making who have disorders which impair executive function, such as PTSD or ADHD?
Okay, yeah, so I think like we in this case, because what I'm doing is more like a basic research of the music, how people who engage in the music may relate with the executive functions. So if we're going to do it as a music intervention, for example, I think like we need to work together with the music therapists, especially when people have like a condition, like a neurodiverse conditions. So especially like in my study, like now, like I'm doing a research for like the healthy adults to see like whether it can improve the executive functions. But I think like it's also promising for people who are like neurodiverse, for example, with people with ADHD, to do like a music intervention and with the help with the music therapist, so it can increase their executive functions. So yeah, so we cannot just
I
work
guess
alone,
it's
but we
actually
need to work together with music therapists. Yeah.
super. Yeah. So music therapists might be already doing this, right? Or at least they might have a practice that, even though not everything has been demonstrated to work, it seems to work in practice.
Yeah, because I know that like in music therapy fields, like it's more they're doing like the intervention to the people with the neurodiverse conditions, whereas like for now, like what I'm doing is for the healthy adults and how to improve, whether like the music can improve the executive functions. But again, like what I found is the relationship between them, so I still need to do a further research to find like the causation of whether like one impact like the others or the other way around. Yeah.
Right. So a few people have been asking a final question for Billy before we go to Rory.
Yeah.
A bit. Yeah, about different instruments. Does it matter? So one asks, I play the flute. Is that a good instrument to learn? But also someone else asks, yeah, the piano. I mean, with two hands.
Mhm.
Is there anything specific to that? Or and how would you learning to play a musical instrument affect the adult brain in today's society?
I see. Okay. So if you ask me, like, is flute like a good instrument? I will say yes as a flutist, but as a researcher, I will say that like, actually, like we still need more evidence whether like a certain music instruments may impact someone better or not. But as far as I understand it, based on my study, like, it's a very broad definitions of like the musicians. So they can be pianists or like playing the music like a woodwind instrument or like brass instrument, or maybe they're playing percussion. So we still don't know yet whether like a certain music instruments can have like a different impacts on like someone. But for now, like what I can say is that when you have like an interest in playing certain kind of like music instruments, it may have like a good impact on your cognitive abilities. And especially like when we're talking about like brain plasticity, so our brain is actually always been developing up until like we're not only like when we're like a young children, but also like when we're getting old. Our brain is plastic, so our brain is so amazing that like it's always, when we learn something, like it's always develop. And maybe like playing the music may also like help us with our brain, so that like it can increase makes like our cognitive abilities not like declining faster, I think. So yeah, so it may also like impact the adults.
Great. Sorry, we have one more question about indeed these, so how it works, right? So and I was thinking, because it seems quite magical in a way, you play a bit of music and you get something out of it. But on the other hand, maybe we should think about what happens whilst playing music. So indeed, is it the kind of actions that you do, or is it the kind of all the different modalities that are involved? So you're listening, you're playing something, you read. or maybe not read. I mean, does it matter whether you the kind of genre? That was another question that comes up later.
Okay, right, yeah.
But yeah, and that relates to, well, so indeed, you have these different executive functions, so shifting, working memory. Are they related, and how are they involved in music making? So how far is it actually? Is it actually not that far?
Okay, right. Yeah, that's a very nice question. So basically, there is this one researchers in America called Robert Schlafik and Brooke Okada. They're doing a research about music, and they're also doing research about music training and executive functions. And they found that I think like this is more like a hypothesis. So it's when persons playing the music, they're actually using all of like these executive functions. So for example, like for a pianist, for example, when a pianist reading like the music sheets in front of them, they're always like using their working memory updating, because when they're playing the piano, they have to read the music sheets and it'll always go to the front. Like you cannot like just playing and then go back, but you always have to update your memory so that the music can play beautifully. And then for like shifting, for example, when you're playing in a band or like in an ensemble, in an orchestra, shifting is when like I will give an orchestra. I will give an example for the orchestra because I'm an orchestra player myself. When you're playing music instrument and then like you have to focus on your own music, and then like you have to listen to the other people, you also have to focus on like the conductor, and you have to shift from one task to the other task. That's when you need the shifting. And for the inhibition, when you're playing music, you always need to know when to stop. So that's why according to the research lab, this actually like playing the music needs all of these executive functions factors. So that's why like there is a transfer of playing the music to these different executive functions in our daily life. So yeah.
Thank you. So let's give Rory some platform here. Your first question is about is music preference preferable to counting sheep, for example? So how does music listening relate to some of these other kinds of things? And also, does the benefit of music depend on gender or age? Yeah, maybe that's the first two questions for you.
Yeah, I think the question of people use all kinds of different methods to help get to sleep, or certain things that they think that they do as part of their nighttime routine that are part of, you know, winding down and getting ready to bed, whether it's reading a book or listening to podcasts or listening to music or I guess counting sheep. And so I think it's a really interesting question of where music fits in that. Why is music special compared to those other things? What are the particular affordances in music versus other things? Which I think is a really interesting question. And that could relate to a person's individual preferences. It could just be their habits. You know, people's sleep patterns can be associated with just particular habitual behavior, and that can have positive and negative effects. So people might just do things because that's what they've always done. The things can have different purposes, not just to psychologically help you relax, but things like so using auditory stimuli as just a masking effect. So I know somebody who grew up in a very hot country where they were used to sleeping with an air conditioner, and when they moved to a more temperate climate, they didn't have that, and they found that they really struggled to get to sleep. And after lots of trial and error, found that actually listening to wave sounds did help, and they figured, oh, that's recreating the sound I used to get from an air conditioner. So there can be lots of different kind of reasons why different methods can help. And so yeah, rather than what's better or worse, I think it's what the kind of needs of the individual are. I'm not so sure about gender differences, but age certainly can be a factor, and there have been studies that have shown how age differentiates the kind of values listeners have and what music they find to be relaxing. I think that can be for a couple of different reasons. I mean, for sleep, your sleep patterns change as you grow older, as you age. I mean, think from toddler to teenager to adult to your how much sleep you need, and then also your sleep pattern shifts as you grow older. And then musically, people's preferences change as they grow up. It's just the kind of the classic thing that our favorite music is the stuff that we listened to when we were younger, when we were teenagers in our earlier lives. And I think part of that relates to it also relates to brain development. I think so. You're emotionally, the way you process things is different when you're a teenager compared to when you're an adult, and so how that affects your relationship with music, and then how that impacts the kind of music that is meaningful for you later on in life, which in turn shapes your kind of preferences and associations with music, which could then impact what music would help you get to sleep. So yeah, there's a lot of factors, a lot of variability to tease apart.
Yes, indeed. Very tricky. But indeed, there are some questions about, entrainment, I guess, or the kind of the role that music might play. So of course, counting sheep is one mechanism, instead of focusing attention, as well as maybe distracting from other intrusive thoughts, which might be similar for playing music. But I think a number of people who were in the chat, they refer to connecting with breathing, so certain patterns in breathing, or maybe indeed the binaural beats, so having certain brain frequencies that you can implicitly influence through musical sounds. So is there an hypothesis there that and also that might change with age, those kind of entrainments?
Breathing is an interesting one. I think I don't know too much about this, but I think there is, because I mean, it's a physical activity, and controlling your breathing rates has wider physiological effects that can help you calm down. Anybody who does yoga, breathing is a big part of that and the exercise. But certainly these things that there's an element of keeping your mind distracted, having something to focus on, having something to attract your attention, but finding the balance between what is enough to keep to focus your mind on something, and something that isn't going to be too distracting, that will prevent you from getting sleep, that will keep you awake. And I think that's the kind of really interesting and probably quite complex factor that can depend on different people. I'm quite curious about the idea of, why do people listen to music versus like audiobooks, things that, or podcasts, things where a person is speaking at them. And again, I mean, some people who use music that contains lyrics. I mean, to my mind, hearing the spoken word, that's communicating a lot of information, and something that our brains are naturally wants to engage with, because that's another person, another human being who might be saying something important. But perhaps for different people, they have kind of different thresholds of what levels of information content is so distracting, or is even enough to help them focus their minds. So for people who their brains are really active at night when they're getting to sleep, and that's something that's preventing them getting to sleep, giving them some ambient piece of music maybe isn't enough. That's actually going to engage with their attention and distract them from the negative thoughts that are preventing them to get to sleep. So I think all these things could perhaps be seen along a kind of gradient of distractiveness, be that sort of the information content that's able to engage with our brain, but that every individual has a different threshold of what is distracting enough to dissociate, and what is not too distracting to bring them away from kind of positive sleep promotion. So yeah, again,
okay.
It's shifting factors.
Yes. So, but I think we're, just for clarification, we're mostly talking about going to sleep, right? So people who have problems with that transition from being awake and then falling asleep. Maybe something while staying asleep could be, it could be another topic. And there was one question about also waking up, whether waking up with music might be a good thing. but yeah, I guess music, it has its benefits that it's so moldable. So, and in maybe in your research there was also the kind of nature sounds that you didn't yet really refer to. But that's another thing to put in the mix. So you could actually make, it's not just music, it's also these other connotations that could help, could play a role in creating a soundscape. So you have all these different functions that you can tap into. It's not, but yeah, so again, maybe the overlap here with Billy is also the multidimensionality, isn't it? So you have the entrainment, so the higher arousal, the lower arousal, as well as the soundscape, which could be modified to be sufficiently both distracting and sort of attention grabbing. And then indeed the kind of comforting zone and the safety of it through also automatic associations. Okay, and then personalization. I think, yeah, I'm not quite sure, there's so many questions still, but which one shall we pick on next? Do you have one that you want to specifically, are you keen to answer one, Billy or Rory?
Oh yeah, so I think like there is one for I think there is one very interesting questions about what's the implication for like the education, and yeah, so basically like I also have like a background in educational psychology actually. So yeah, one of the question is, can your studies please fit into the current debate about the reduction of music education for school-age children? I think like this is a very interesting question because this is actually also happened in my country, Indonesia. So in Indonesia, like a lot of schools, they don't have any more like music class or like art class, but they change it into like math class or like science class because they think it's more important than like the music. But I also believe that like when you're using the music in everyday life, it's basically, especially in the school setting, you're playing music not because like you must be a musician, but then like I can say maybe like balance between like the cognition, behavior, and like the affective. So I truly believe that the music can give like a benefits more than like just you can play the music, but it can also give you the benefits for the cognitive abilities benefit, for example. So when people said like, oh, you're not going to be like a smart person by playing the music, but no, the result of my study is that there's a relationship between playing music actively and also the executive functions, which is also part of like the cognitive abilities. So I can say that like this can also be one of the strong argument why music is not supposed to be reduced in the school. So yeah.
Yeah, super. And actually that reminds me of maybe also for, so what are the implications, also the research by Rory maybe. So it's not that we should just expect music to, you put on music and then it happens, right? So, but we can use music actively. So we should see music as a sort of a, well, included in our life as to be an all-round person in a way. So it should be part of our education, should also, and it can be part of our culture of the things we do to have a good life in a way, and indeed to know how music can be used as part of sleep routine, to educate ourselves about that and each other, because the way we use it is part of that. It's not just a medicine that you put in and things happen magically from that. So I think we are there for closing. And Rory, did you want to take over from that?
Thank you very much indeed. I'm so sorry we haven't had a chance to get round to all of your questions in the chat. Thank you genuinely for your engagement. You know, obviously there's huge engagement in the chat there. As you will have seen in the chat from Helen, what Helen has mentioned is we will collect all of these questions. There will be a follow-up email. We will send these questions on to the speakers and we'll provide you with the relevant links. So hopefully we'll be able to address some of these afterwards. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Billy and Rory for giving us an insight into their fascinating research. And I must say it was an absolute joy to see the joy that you had in presenting your research to us. So thank you very much indeed. And also to Professor Renee Timmers for your engaging introduction, and also for hosting that question and answer session for us.